Hey guys, this is your host Nick. This is going to be part two of the interview I did with Dr. Chad Carlson. Like I said in the first part, this was over an hour and 20 minutes, push an hour and a half. So I don't want to make you guys sit there and listen to the entire episode in one sitting. I know that would be kind of difficult for some people to do. So thought I'd make it easier and make it a little easier on me because now I don't have to try to scramble to get another interview. I've got, essentially 2 weeks worth of content in one day. So this is part two, and as of right now, I do not know who the next guest or what the next building will be. So keep an eye on social media, and you will see that in the next few days, hopefully. Thank you. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter where you're from. You have a tale. You matter. On this show, we strive to bring you the tales of people from Small Hope College in Holland, Michigan. So join us. Sit back, relax, kick your feet up, plug in the headphones, or crank the music up on your drive, and just listen to our tales. Because it doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter who you are. You have a tale, and you deserve to be heard.
I do all those things now. But I had bigger issues, I think, academically when I was at Hope. And one of them had to do with what I wanted to do as a career. So I tried 3 or 4 different major paths before it was education. And everybody in my family, I felt like, had become a teacher. So many people had become teachers in my family. 3 of my 4 grandparents had. I knew my brother was going to. And so just a lot of people in my life that were educators, are educators. And I just thought, I don't want to do that.
Right.
But I never felt drawn into the business world, which is what my dad did. Never really liked science enough to get into some of that stuff. And to be honest, I didn't have a view of the world that was big enough to understand that there was more to it than just really those 3 things.
Right.
So I sort of fell back into education because I did well in those courses. And in some sense, because they didn't require a whole lot of me. So I didn't have to study a lot, cram for exams. So my roommate for a couple of years in college, one of my best friends, is now he's literally a rocket scientist. He's a professor of systems and information engineering, and a professor of mechanical and something else, and aerospace engineering systems. So this guy that he's working on, trying to make sure that when we do come up with the technology for self-driving cars, which we think we have, that we can predict when they're going to break down so we don't have these mass casualties, right? So this guy that was always studying, right? And even, he didn't have to, but he was just so driven in that field.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't want a program like that, right? I wanted a program where I could rely on my strengths, which were working with other people, being with kids, and being creative in some sense. And so I sort of fell into that just because I didn't want to work. I didn't feel like I was working hard in the education department, and that's kind of what I wanted in an academic program.
Right.
But it wasn't that it wasn't a tough program. It was time intensive, but I was just enjoying the work I was doing there. And so I didn't believe it was work.
Right.
So that fit for me. But I still didn't, even once I graduated and student taught, I still didn't want to teach K through 12. And so still was sort of second guessing what I was doing, and that's why I maybe wasn't motivated. I remember getting one report back from a professor in one of my education classes that said, it was basically the comment was at the bottom of the page, you are rarely alert or even awake in class. Now, I would argue that awake part. I didn't sleep through that class, but I would agree I was never alert in that class, and that must have bothered that professor. I feel bad about him. But I wasn't driven to become, to train to become the best teacher I wanted to be. This was just a program I fell into by default in some sense. And so I went through, 4.5 years here, student taught that last semester, and I just wasn't into it yet. And so that was a difficulty for me. Well, what am I going to do? Geez, I mean, and my wife came in. We spent most of the last 3 years dating. She came in knowing she wanted to do accounting and did accounting, and came out with, by the fall, middle of fall of our senior year, she had 7 job offers from 7 interviews, right? So she knew, right? She was set. She wanted to do that, and here I am floundering around,
right?
Not really knowing what I wanted to do, going into education, but not really wanting to teach. But what else are you going to do with an education degree at that point in time? Right. The options weren't I wasn't as creative in thinking about the options as what I could have been. So that sort of was another sort of dominating facet of my story at Hope, my tale at Hope, is just that. Not knowing what I wanted to do, not wanting to teach, but falling into education because I didn't have the internal fortitude to be able to say, no, I'm going to be courageous and step into doing something else.
Right.
I wish I had done that. And that's not a knock on the education department because it's a great program. My grandpa taught in it for a long time. But I wish I had tried, for instance, I wish I had gone to become a philosophy major or a history major. But I think I was scared that maybe I wasn't going to be good at those things.
Right.
Or maybe they would push me to do more work than I wanted to do academically.
I feel you there.
That sounds, I feel like I'm coming across like I was a lazy student, and I will say I absolutely step into that. I was a lazy student. Yeah. That's part of my tale.
Right.
I've come around to now be very engaged academically. I love what I do as a professor, but geez, nobody would have guessed this for me.
And I'm happy that you're, talking about that, because of all the other interviews that I've done, I can think maybe, when I sat down with Coach Mo and he talked about when he met Liz and all the stuff that he did wrong. All these I'm not knocking any of my other guests, but it's all, positives. Or not even, if not positive, just like a neutral view. They're not, I did this wrong. I did this wrong. So it's I'm glad that you're being open and being human with this.
I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, and one of those is, it's that which I live into every day now as I come to work as a professor trying to teach Hope College students, knowing that I was lazy, unmotivated, and I would have just sat, if I even showed up, I would be sitting in the back. Man, I would have hated that. Right. As a professor, I would have hated Chad Carlson, the student. And so living into that, it's real to me, it's there, it's something that I won't ever forget because I'm here. Yeah. I'm here at Hope College. So. Yeah, definitely negatives. I don't dwell on those, but they're certainly a part of my tale.
Yeah.
Part of my tale.
But now you can take that experience of, I know, I was that kid. So how can I, what could I have done, or what would I have wanted done to me to get me to participate? Now you can use that in your classes.
I try.
Right.
I try. And some of it too is, I think I look back and I realize how unmotivated of a student I was. I wish I was different, but I also realized that I loved everything else I was doing. Yep. And I think it was all fruitful stuff. The Bible studies I was leading, the Young Life leadership I was doing, the publicity stuff I was doing for the basketball program, going to speak at churches, going to speak at schools. I loved doing all that stuff. Right. And I wouldn't want to do a minute less of that stuff. But I certainly could have been a more conscientious student. And so I get that with some of my students too. Yeah. And that's where, for students that are listening to this, I see you. If you're the unmotivated student that you don't think I know you are, right? But for some students that are unmotivated in the classroom, I know they're doing such great stuff outside of it too. Right. And so I want to make sure they're not just skating by, but I also understand the demands and understand the ways in which sometimes not all of us are motivated by reading stories about narrative, for instance, or about ethical theory. Right. I understand that doesn't get everybody going like it gets me going. So I try to work with that, but it's a balancing act. Oh yeah. But I certainly know, I can identify exactly which student hasn't done the reading, and sometimes I'm not going to call them out on it. All right. Because I know that would have killed me. As much as it might have been good for me, that would have killed. I would have been embarrassed. Exactly. I'm not into embarrassing students, even though maybe I do that, not knowing. Sometimes. No, yeah. Just by saying stuff. So that's what I try to. That's what I keep in mind here, as I teach at Hope College, knowing that geez, I didn't read through one book in 4 years of college. I opened them from time to time and skimmed through them, but never read what I was supposed to read. I just wasn't motivated extrinsically that way by a grade or by this or that. And I've come to the point now where I'm intrinsically motivated in most of what I do. And I guess I find value now in reading and learning for learning's sake.
Right.
But I wasn't there when I was at Hope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And no, like, I'm glad that you spoke to the audience saying, any students, because that was my whole mindset of getting this podcast started. It was like, there could be a student just like you who hears this, and, I'm going to touch on your book later on. And they're going to be like, he was unmotivated like me, and now he's an author. Like,
and so what I want them to say is, all right, well, it might work out at the end, but what I don't want them to say is, oh, well, then I can just continue to be lazy.
No, yeah, but I mean, like, so they can see, like,
right.
Oh, he went through the same things I did.
Right.
He got out of it. What can I take from this?
Right. So what I always follow up with when I say how lazy I was as a student is to follow up with, I had to be doubly motivated in graduate school. Not
Right.
only did I have to try to keep up with the content that every other grad student had to do, but I was competing against, and you're not competing for grades really in a grad school, a PhD program like I was in,
Mm-hmm.
but I was working alongside students who had always been intellectually motivated,
Right.
who had already done the readings that I was supposed to have done in high school and in college that I never did because I was lazy.
Mm-hmm.
Now I had to read those twice as well in order to just try to compete with them or try to get at the level they were,
Right.
to have a decent conversation with them or with my professors.
Yeah.
And so, man, I worked my tail off in grad school just to catch up for my laziness
Mm-hmm.
as an undergrad. And I think I had taken enough away from Hope to understand what I needed to do, right? I was smart enough to know what I had to do and how hard I had to work.
Right.
And I think I could write in a decent way. So I did have a professor my first semester at Penn State who just shredded our papers. I mean, just red ink all over. It was his way or the highway, and
Right.
not a sentence went by that was written well in his eyes. And I do remember getting my first major paper back from him and thinking, I didn't do so badly. Like, I thought I was going to get a 0,
Right.
And then basically, this was just a small seminar class. There were only 6 of us in it. And he said, I can tell Chad's been at a liberal arts school just because, you're writing, you can just tell that you've worked on writing, whereas other students were at programs that maybe hadn't.
Right.
So I felt really good about that. At least I got something from my Hope education.
Right.
From that, knowing that I left so much on the table.
Yeah.
That it could have been taken. I had to work so hard. So that's sort of the part of the story that needs to be there
Mm-hmm.
for Hope students to hear my story of being lazy and now becoming a professor, lazy academically, now a professor, is just that there was a period of time, this 3-year period, where I was reading every night till midnight. I was getting up, I was going to the library every day, I was writing, and I had to work twice as hard as everyone else
Right.
to catch up. Right.
Oh, yeah. Wow. So it's actually a perfect segue. So now you talk about, grad school. You had a doctorate in education, right?
Yep. It was in the kinesiology department.
Mm-hmm.
So a PhD in kinesiology, but it was a history and philosophy of sport program.
Okay.
So most of my coursework was in actually Penn State's philosophy department. Some of it was in the kinesiology department, and then a few classes here and there in the history department.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the program, and I found something that I was really, really motivated in, right? This gets us full circle to my interest as a kid. It was
Right.
all sport for
Yep.
me. I'm not, super interested in, I wasn't naturally interested in philosophy or history
Mm-hmm.
just for its own sake. But as soon as we start talking about it in the context of our humanity or
Yep.
our physicality, then I dive in, right? And so
Right.
in some sense, I've been, I come into this program with a professor who was my dissertation advisor, who was similar to me in that he was an athlete, parents where he came into philosophy late, and through sport really came
Okay.
into philosophy. And so he and I sort of tracked, and he was a really close mentor of mine and a really good friend. And so I got a chance to see that, and that was really helpful for me to see that we've got this guy that isn't apologizing for being a jock,
Right.
and is also really smart because he thinks about sport a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be like him. I do. I still want to be like him. I'm just a great guy. And I caught the bug there. I had some really good professors there too. But more than anything, it was the content. I finally found some content
Right.
that so many schools did not offer, but Penn State did offer. I found it. This is my stuff.
Right.
And I'm motivated from there.
Yeah. And so now that kind of explains why, your senior seminar
Right.
that I took.
It's exactly it. The class on sports and ethics.
Yep.
That's exactly it, right? That there's so much that goes wrong in sport
Mm-hmm.
that it's a wonderful laboratory for thinking about ethics.
It is, because I came into it with my mindset, and I'm sitting there, and I was with Aaron, like he would have something totally different, from an athlete standpoint,
Right.
and I'm looking at, from a fan, or my dad was a soccer coach, my brother played soccer, so growing up, seeing kind of that side of it, and I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense now that you say that.
Right. Right. And so much of philosophy, so much of ethics specifically, is drawing on your own experiences and reflecting on your own experiences. And so so many of us have encountered sport in one way or another growing up. And so it's a nice topic by which we can understand ethics.
Right.
It's also a lot of our livelihood is at stake there when it comes to, our behavior. And so sport gives us a great example of thinking about why we do things we do wrong and why we do them over and over again. It shows really where our heart is, and that's at the basis of ethics.
Right.
Is your behavior, which is driven by your heart, I believe, as much as your brain. So we're thinking about, when you have the opportunity to decide, well, what job am I going to take? If I have these two options, it's sort of an ethical dilemma, right? Which one will produce the most good and the least amount of bad?
Right.
Which one is right for me? Sort of this fit. That's sort of ethically based. You have time to think through that, right? And so much of sports just occurs, and in terms of our behavior, of how we're going to act when we're playing sport, no matter what level, no matter what level of organization, you don't have time to think about that sometimes. You just act. And so sometimes sport reveals, who we are. And that's part of the fun, is to then have time in a class like sports and ethics to step back and say, okay, what I did and what I justified maybe isn't justifiable. Or maybe I shouldn't be fearful of acting in that way. Maybe I shouldn't be worried about that. That's actually okay, an okay thing to do. So that's what I've come to. And it comes from sport. It comes from my love for sport.
Yep.
But also I think my love for doing things well and right. And, my interest in sort of being good, trying to be good, and helping others do the same. So, yeah, we work through that stuff in the sport and ethics class. And a lot of the classes I teach have sport in the title. I just love that. I just love that. I would have, I teach a course on sport in the ancient world. Okay. And it's a cultural heritage class, and we talk a lot about, we read through Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Okay.
We read through Aristotle. And boy, if you had asked me, if current self, if Chad Carlson, 2018, the end of the year, would have gone back and had a conversation with Chad Carlson back in 2000 when I was in college, and said, hey, this is going to be great. You're going to be a professor. You're going to be really excited about the Iliad and the Odyssey and Aristotle. I would have probably beat up my current self today, right? I would say, stop being a moron, right? That's not you. You're not going to do that. Plus, you're being a total nerd. And that would have bothered me, right?
Right.
So right now, I just look back on that and I laugh at how things have changed. But I love some of those things that tell us about our humanity, who we are as people, right? So reading about and thinking about what Aristotle has to say about how we become good people. It's by doing good things, or by doing things that good people do. Right. Doing that over and over again. Yep. And I think that's kind of the basis of this podcast, as I understand these tales of hope, that you've got these stories from these really good people that for students to listen to, say, you want to learn how to be good and live a good life? Here's an example. Right. Exactly. Brian Morehouse. Here's an example. Greg Mitchell. Here's an example. Paul Boersma. Right. We've got all these great examples to learn from. But it's hard for us to sometimes step back and say, yeah, what that person does, I want to do that. Or I want to do it in that way. Even though those are with us, we don't think of it in those terms. So this is something that might help us. And I really like that. And I love reading Homer and thinking about, why is it that the people did this or did that related to sport and war, right? Both of those things. So it's become really interesting to me. Oh, yeah. And I hope to convey that to other students and to hit them earlier than or to get them motivated maybe in ways that I wasn't, just because I had shut down. That's the student that's exciting for me. Yeah. Wow.
It's just, knowing, like I'm saying, knowing you, like, just thinking about the old you that you're talking about, like, I don't see that at all. I mean, I can still see, the competitiveness that you would have had. I saw you playing noon ball for that summer. Yep. Whatever. But, like, saying, oh, I would have looked back and thought, what a total nerd. And, like, wow. Yeah. And in some sense, it's been like this major change in who I am. And I certainly would never advocate for that, except I feel like I've been open to sort of the presence of where I'm being
called and what I'm being drawn towards. And I think I was always a nerd, but my child self, my young Chad, really tried to repress some of that. You know, and said, well, don't work too hard in school because you don't want to be seen as like this total academic, total nerd. Now I live into that. I am that. And I think it took a little while for my wife to accept that change in me. Right. And that change occurred during our marriage. And so for her, I remember a couple times when she was around me and someone else and we started talking about something deeply philosophical. And I remember her saying, I could see in her body language the interest just leaves. You know, she's a numbers person, she's an accountant, very good at it, but very uninterested in sort of deep philosophical reflection. And when I started getting into that and her thinking, you gotta be kidding me, what did I get myself into? I'm leaving. You deal with this on your own, this discussion on your own. And so that presented some issues for us. But I think we both, everyone grows over time, right? Everyone changes over time. And so we've done this thing together, and she's walked alongside me and been very supportive of me becoming a nerd. Or at least expressing my inner nerd. Right. The thing that I knew I always had. She didn't know I always had it, but now she does.
No, yeah. And I mean, I guess that's, another thing we can be saying to the audience is kind of like, what you don't want to, you might think, oh, I don't like this, but it's really you saying, I don't want to admit that I like this. Like, don't be afraid when you're older to start looking into that.
That's exactly it. And I think about, I really feel like I'm comfortable in my own skin now. And that was something that my dissertation advisor identified in me too, that his other grad students maybe didn't have. And while I wasn't nearly where they were in terms of intellectual abilities and writing abilities, I could write with them, but I couldn't think with them, right? They were just on a whole different level. But he always appreciated that I was comfortable with who I was. And in some sense that came from, I think, knowing in my heart of hearts, I'm a sports person. Right. And knowing that I achieved what I had always set out to achieve in sports, right? And so I played 2 years of the lowest level you could find, but it was professional basketball, right? So I played 2 years right after college. I got paid to play basketball. And it was an international league, but it was poorly run. Okay. It was poorly paid. But it was paid, and really, a goal in my life was I want to play pro basketball, and I barely got there. Right, if we're talking about the landscape of pro basketball, like I'm clinging to the edge with my fingernail. Right now, that was about it. But I got there, right? And so that sort of validated my existence for me to be able to then say, okay, I've achieved this main life goal I have. I'm comfortable with who I am, right? Whatever else happens after this, no one can take away from me the fact that I played 2 seasons of low level, but it was pro basketball. No one can take that away from me, right? And so that to me was something where I think I left Holland then to go to Penn State after having played those 2 years, feeling really good about who I was from a sports perspective and saying, you know what, I'm okay now developing the other parts of my identity. And one of those was someone who likes to learn. And so no longer did I care that I could be a nerdy grad student because, you know what, I played pro basketball. Something like that. Right. And again, that was such a small part of what people saw of me, but to me, in my heart, that was such a big part of something I needed to do for myself. Right. I did it. Now I'm comfortable sort of maybe growing in other ways. Right. Wow. Where was that league located? Yeah, it was a league. So Grand Rapids had a team for a while. This was a team before. Right now they have the Grand Rapids Drive, which is a G League team that has far superior players than what we had. But there was Grand Rapids has a long history of these minor league basketball teams that would last for 5 to 10 years and then they'd go bankrupt. And this was one of them, called the Grand Rapids Flight, which is in the International Basketball League, the IBL. Okay. And then Holland actually had a team for a few years here too. Really? So I think they went kaput before you got here on campus. Okay. But we played in the Civic Center. Never got a lot of fans here. That was kind of again, I didn't think it was I didn't think it was run in a way that promoted sort of sustainability from a business perspective. But Grand Rapids lasted a while because it's a bigger metropolitan area. Yep. We had some great athletes that played there in that league, and so I hang my hat on that. Again, I was probably one of the worst players in the entire league, but I was there. I
Yeah.
played. I got a lot better to the point where, I felt like I was a legitimate basketball player.
Right.
I felt that at the end of my first year and at the beginning of my second year before I had an injury in my second year. But I felt like I was as good a player as there was in the area.
Right.
I wasn't the best on my team, but in terms of guys that were coming from the Holland, Grand Rapids area, I felt like I could compete with anybody.
Right.
And so to me, that validated who I was and allowed me to grow in other ways after that.
And I mean, like you're saying, you might have been the worst player on the team, and you're just above, we could say you're just above college level. But how many people can say that they did that?
Well, that was my mindset.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that was exactly it. And it was a league that was filled with Division I and Division II players. There were so few of us that were Division III. And so for me to get in there and be able to play a little bit, and overall I look back on that career and say, boy, that was probably one of the least successful professional careers anyone could ever have, right, in terms of sport. But there were moments there where I felt like I had reached my potential. I'd reached my peak, and that there was no one that could stop me.
Exactly.
There were moments that I felt that way, and to me that validated my existence in some ways, and made me just much more comfortable in who I was as a person moving forward.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, I never knew that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it's right. So that's the funny thing is that you play Hope College basketball and you play in front of so many people, and that validates you in one way. But then to feel like I actually moved up a level after that really validated some feelings for me. So
nice. So, as I had mentioned before, you wrote a book, and that was recently published.
I did.
Go into that. Now that is about March Madness.
Yeah.
Right? The early years.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was a fun project for me, and it was another thing that I think I sort of had to do to validate who I was and what I believed I was capable of. And so it was a fun project looking at the history and the origins of college basketball postseason tournaments.
Yep.
It's a great history there. It hadn't been written before. And so there was a gap in the literature, and also my interests were right there too, with sort of the history of college basketball. And so it was a fun project for me. It was a hard project.
Oh, yeah.
It consumed me sort of for the 5-6 years that it took, where anytime I had a free evening, kids were down in bed, I got nothing to do, my thinking goes to, man, I need to work on that.
Right.
And so it was draining in that sense, but it was a fun project to prove that, I can be a legitimate, academic. I can be a legitimate scholar. I felt like I needed to do this for myself.
Right.
So I wrote the book for people who love basketball, and for professors and students who want to study basketball. But I really wrote it for myself. Right. To prove that I could do it. And it was a good project in that sense, and a fun one. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So you said, because I was thinking it was about, the big NCAA tournament, but you just said tournaments.
Yeah, right.
So you cover NIT.
Yep. So the NCAA tournament, the NIT was an early one. The third one was what's now the NAIA tournament.
Yep.
Which wasn't called it back then. That's actually the oldest one. So the first one on the scene was the NAIA tournament. It's called the National Invitation College Basketball Tournament at the time, but morphed into the NAIA. The NCAA tournament was third, so the NIT was second. But first one, NAIA in 1937, NIT 1938, NCAA 1939. NCAA was the smallest and the least popular at the time.
Which is weird to think.
Which is weird because now it's this $1 billion a year revenue-generating behemoth.
And how many people have heard of the NAIA?
Exactly. So the NCAA administrators made some real shrewd moves in the 30s, 40s, and 50s to get it from this really small, parochial, not well-attended event to what it is today. And that's kind of what I'm chronicling.
Right.
Yeah. So those first sort of 15 years, the late 30s, 40s, and the early 50s. What happened for the NCAA to become this afterthought, to then growing into this, the biggest tournament that there is, right? The most wagered upon sports event in our entire landscape, right? So it was a fun project, and that's it. The tournaments, yes. Yeah. There were other tournaments as well. The National Catholic Basketball Tournament that existed for a little while. There was the National Back to Campus Invitational, so one that was just going to be held at one campus. There were all these tournaments that sort of sprung up, and most of them died off as the NCAA sort of gobbled everything up and expanded. So the NCAA tournament was originally 8 teams in a year participated. So as it grew, more and more of the good teams wanted to play in that, and there was less good teams for the other tournaments to have.
And so it's all postseason tournaments. It's not about
all postseason tournaments. Obviously, some of it you have to refer to sort of the regular seasons and how one team got in versus another, but it's focused on the tournament specifically.
So I wasn't sure if you also went back to, like the beginning of season, the small tournaments around there, but
no, not as much of that. It's just all postseason stuff. Yeah.
Okay. So now, obviously, I know we can find it at the bookstore. Or is it still available there?
Oh boy, I haven't checked in the bookstore. I know it's at Hope's Library. I believe that they sold out of it at Reader's World downtown.
Okay.
You can get it at Barnes & Noble has had it. They might be sold out too. And some of those bookstores won't re-up some of those academic books. But yeah, get it there. Get it on Amazon. It's probably the easiest. I'm sure there's used copies out there.
Okay. Yeah, I was because I wanted to make sure, I want to get that.
Yeah, this is the time of year when a lot of times people will stop by and say, hey, bought this as a present for my son, my husband, and whatever else. Would you sign it for me? And I love doing that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's got long chapters. I'll warn you, it's a history. And so I do also tell people, if your sleep medications are not working for you, this will work, and it will be cheaper because it's a one-time payout. You're not continually buying that
for
stuff.
some people.
For some people. I know there are some that love basketball and will really get into this stuff, but there's some really long chapters and some really intricate detail. And so sometimes, for instance, my wife, who's had the book that came out, and it's been out for now 14 months, she's on page 12. So what I'm saying is there are some people that find, so you read through a page and it's just this academic jargon, and it is there's some parts that read quicker than others, but it puts her to sleep. And she was a basketball player. So anyways, that's been a source of tension for us. And but I joke about that, but certainly, I read to sort of slow my mind before bed too. And so I know sometimes people do that. So this can be a good sleep aid.
Well, this is going to be the longest episode we've had. We're pushing hour 15 right now.
I'm so sorry.
No, don't apologize. I was actually thinking about not doing an episode next week for Thanksgiving, but I might just cut this in half and...
Hey, there we go.
There we go.
Part two.
Yeah, exactly.
Love it.
But, so the last thing I want to talk about before we start wrapping it up is... I just blanked on it. Your new position now.
Yes, my new position.
So
I have been... the previous 4 years, one of the things I did as sort of a course release was to coach the men's JV basketball team on campus. I've sort of transitioned out of that and into a role where I'm directing the sort of curriculum issues with the general education program on campus. So all of the gen ed courses that students take, I sort of oversee a committee that ensures that those are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so thinking about issues of what does it mean to be a liberal arts college, and what are the goals of general education at Hope College? So we want our students to have jobs, and we want them to have maybe more callings than jobs. So how does the general education program help with that? Right. So if you're not interested at all in science, what can a science course do for you? To help you understand how scientists think and how science provides argumentation in different ways than, say, philosophy does, or psychology as a softer science. So that's sort of part of what I'm getting into now. But I just love it. Part of the fun for me is being able to spend more time with faculty members across campus. So usually in the past, and I love this, coaching from 3 to 6 every day. You're around your guys, and I love that. I miss those relationships dearly. But it's been so fun for me to be able to develop relationships among the rest of the faculty. So now, instead of being in the gym from 3 to 6 p.m., I'm in meetings, and I'm spending time with other faculty members that I haven't had a chance to spend time with before.
That's awesome. And it's actually really nice to hear that, because I think it was closer to the beginning of the year. I came and I sat down right here, and I said, are you, you ready for the season and everything? And then you told me you're not doing it, you're doing this. So I was like, okay, well, what does that entail? And you're like, I don't know.
I've got a better idea now.
Exactly.
But it's been a process. Boy, it's been a process. And it's been a lot of fun. It's been a good process.
And I mean, as someone who had zero interest in, the sciences, the maths, I don't know if it was just not as well run back then or what, but I feel like you're going to help make it interesting for the students like me.
I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
And because you and I mean, we're cut from the same cloth there,
Exactly.
right? We're both like that. And so there's a different maybe interest there as opposed to someone who's always just naturally been interested in certain things.
Exactly.
We came to it late, right? We figure things out differently. And so, yeah, we're working on trying to find ways to increase the engagement in the general education courses, to not see them as sort of like just gen eds that you got to take, right? Just to check boxes.
Yep.
But there's really some ways in which we can really grow while taking courses outside of our discipline in areas that we're just not familiar with. And so it's exciting for me to be a part of conversation with other faculty members who are really, really excited about this and really good at what they do.
Yeah.
And to spend time with them sort of crafting what our general education can be, right? We want it to be all it can be. And so we hope it will continually grow and progress, and that we can really find that students leave Hope College believing that they had very engaging coursework.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
That's important for us.
Awesome. Well, to wrap this thing up, I want you to do two things for me. The first, and I mean, I guess you kind of touched on this, but just do like a quick little, like letter to your freshman self. Just kind of looking back on everything from now, like looking back all those years, and just kind of what would you say to yourself?
I would say, don't worry. Don't worry. And I say that maybe meaning a little bit differently than what that usually means. So don't worry. Not that it's all gonna work out. I think I always thought it would always work out. But don't worry about the little things.
Right.
And so don't worry, number one, and number two, don't put things off. And that was another way that I think I became a lazy student. I just put these things off. I thought I could do it all on the night before. I can study for the test just the night before. So don't worry and don't put things off. But to freshman self, man, I think I would say you gotta remember this stuff because it's awesome. I mean, the 4 years at Hope College were an amazing 4 years.
Right.
And while I wouldn't trade anything I have right now, I love what I have going on in my life right now. And I loved what I had at college. It was, but boy, those were just some really unique and fun times when you get to live with friends,
right,
and really sort of do life together. Was just a blast. That's not as poignant an answer as I would like to give, but like you said, I spent a lot of time talking about that. Yeah, so don't worry about the small stuff, and also. Don't put things off.
Yeah. Okay. And the last thing, and I apologize for apologizing at the end of the podcast instead of the beginning. If you guys are hearing any background noise, the weight room is literally on the other side of this wall. So you might hear weights clanging. I just heard Danielle, and my apologies. I didn't think that through, but...
This is my life. This is my office. And it's kind of I've just gotten used to it. I don't even notice it anymore, really, to be honest with you. There's some loud voices. There's sometimes music pumping through, so we're lucky. Right now, there's no music.
Yeah, that's very true.
That might turn on at any point in time. But thanks for mentioning that. It's actually not that Nick and I are not in here, doing squats and doing, hang cleans. That's actually the room next to us, right? Yeah.
And I mean, also, I apologize, but at the same time, I don't. Because, like with my episode of Paul Boersma, we sat out on the front porch of Keppel House.
Fun.
Like, I want to get you, in a sense, in your natural environment.
This is it.
Exactly. So it's like any background noises we pick up, it's not going to be enough to overtake our voices.
Right.
But still people can hear, this is your daily life.
This is my habitat.
Exactly.
Yes, this is my forest.
If only we would have done on the basketball court.
That squeaky noise. That would be a great one, too. Yeah.
But last thing I want you to do for me, I want you to rate your life up until now on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being, this is nothing like I thought it was going to turn out when I was college freshman. 5 being, this is everything that I thought it would be.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to give you 2 answers, right? So the philosophy for me is making this more difficult than what it has to be. So two scales. The first one is on my expectations. Expectations are of maybe what I would become. I think for expectations, I'm probably a 1 out of 5.
Right.
This is not what I ever envisioned for myself. But on the scores of satisfaction level, that would be the other metric. How sort of satisfied are you and motivated and excited about what you have going on? I'm off the charts on that one. I'm a 5. I'm loving I'm loving what I have going on right now.
Right.
So I couldn't be happier right now. I thought that, you always think that your future will be happy and satisfying.
Right.
And so I sort of assumed that would be the case, but this is great right now, even though it's doing something that I never, ever thought I would.
Right.
That's a great question. I love it.
See, I told you at the start of this, we were talking about it, and he, Chad was reading through my show notes, and he's like, "Oh, there's just gonna be some deep questions." It's like I've said on multiple episodes. That's what we do on the show.
This is so cool. And I tell you, if there's value for any viewers or listeners, that's great. But for me, this has been such a sort of cathartic time to just sort of reflect and process on my story. And I feel great right now. Just haven't been able to process in a way that I haven't in the past. So
right, some of the stuff you might never have thought about.
Yeah, and to reflect on this. And this is what we ask students to do in our best conceived courses on campus, to reflect on your life.
Exactly.
So often we're not ready for that, or doing it when we ask you to do it right when you come into college, which is a hard time, or right when you're leaving college, which is a hard time. Today was this last hour and 21 minutes. Holy smokes!
I know.
I'm so sorry.
No.
This has been a really helpful time for me. So thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I was like, I can't remember. I don't think I sent you an email in the summer about it. I think it was just the one time that I came in here and I mentioned it.
Yeah. I think so. I can't remember. Or if you did, this summer was a whirlwind for me, so I apologize.
No, but I mean, I guess, even though I didn't send you that email, or maybe I did, I don't remember, but you were one of the first people I wanted to come on the show.
Nice.
Because I knew, just from the class that I had with you, and even just talking with you outside of class. Mm-hmm. I'd be working and you'd come by and chat for a little bit.
Yeah.
Just those conversations, I knew we were going to have something good, but I didn't realize we were going to have this.
Well, longer isn't always better. So if there are parts you can cut out, feel free to cut.
I don't edit it at all.
No, it's all live, right?
Yeah.
Nice.
So, thank you again so much for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. This was a blast.
And guys, if you're still with us, which I hope you all are, you know where to find us. Like I said, top of the show, Facebook, Tales of Hope Podcast, Instagram and Twitter, @Tales of Hope Pod, all lowercase, no spaces, no underscores, nothing. YouTube, Tales of Hope Podcast, the Anchor app, Tales of Hope, or you can go on the website, anchor.fm/Tales of Hope. From both of those, you can find us everywhere else. And as well, shoot me an email, storiesofhopepod@gmail.com. Let me know if you want to come on the show. Let me know if you have any questions, any comments. If you have any questions about maybe something Chad said, I can forward him that email and I will get back with you with his response. Just get a hold of us, find us everywhere, spread the word, because just like how I end every episode, you can be college professor / author / part-time philosopher like Chad. You can be a college janitor like me, in the total opposite end of the spectrum. You can be a student. You can be anything else. Doesn't matter. You have a tale to tell, and you deserve to tell it. And that's what this show is all about. So again, thank you so much for sticking through this. This will probably be broken into 2 parts.